Hi, good evening. Hello and welcome to tonight's Bruin Family Insights virtual discussion, brought to you by UCLA Parent and Family Programs. Throughout the academic year, we engage around a variety of topics and issues intended to help you best support your student. My name is Leanne Koliak, and I'm from Tampa, Florida, and I am a Bruin mom. My daughter is a second-year student, and I am also a member of the UCLA Parents Council leadership team. Today's conversation with our panelists will focus on the 2018 UCLA Common Book, The Best We Could Do, a graphic novel by Thi Bui. This evening, I am so excited to have with us Dr. Cynthia L. Alvarez, Coordinator for First Year Experience, Dr. Victor Bascara, Associate Professor and Chair of Asian American Studies, and Stephen Young, a student who is a second-year student and Political Advocacy Coordinator for the Vietnamese Student Union. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Cynthia, can you please start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your current role?
Thank you, Leanne. Yes, my name is Cynthia Alvarez, and I am part of First Year Experience here at UCLA. I am a three-time Bruin. I received all three of my degrees here at UCLA, so I bleed the blue and gold. And in the past, I've worked for the Higher Education Research Institute as a research analyst, and I've lectured for the Department of Chicano and Chicano Studies here at UCLA. My research focuses on higher education access, in particular for first-generation Latina and Latino families.
Thank you, Cynthia. Victor, can you please go next?
Sure. Thank you, Leanne. It's my pleasure to be here this evening to talk about this wonderful, amazing book, The Best We Could Do by Thi Bui. And my areas of expertise, I've been here at UCLA on the faculty now for about a dozen years or so. My areas of specialization are American literature and Asian American literature and Asian American culture. So I'm very looking forward to talking with the panelists and perhaps answer questions from parents and the community about how we can appreciate various ways, various strategies we can use for appreciating the illuminating insights of Thi Bui's book.
Thank you, Victor. And we're excited to have a student on our panel. Stephen, could you please introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Leanne. Thank you for introducing me. Everyone, my name is Stephen. I'm a second year here at UCLA. I am studying business economics, and I'm double minoring in labor and workplace studies, as well as public affairs. As introduced by Leanne, I am the political advocacy coordinator of the Vietnamese Student Union, and it was my pleasure to work together with Cynthia and on behalf of VSU to really expand the Common Book program population. And I'm so excited to be here today, along with the other panelists, to talk a little bit more about the themes of the book.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, thank you all for sharing. And it sounds like you all bring a unique experience and insight to tonight's conversation. To get us started, I'd like to pose a question to each of you. Cynthia, let's start with you. How would you answer the following question, please? Why do you believe The Best We Could Do is an important text to read as UCLA's 2018 Common Book?
Well, I think this was a really, really beautiful book for the committee to select. It does a wonderful job of providing a glimpse into an experience that is not often highlighted as in our campus, but also in the general, general mainstream media. I think for students in particular, it's an exercise, or it can be an exercise in empathy for those that don't necessarily directly relate to the experience. And so the way it was told, the way the story is crafted, it's very relatable. And I think in particular with UCLA being such a global campus, it provides a space, a jumping off point to connect with other people, to understand their experience, but also understand that everybody has a story. We all have a story of how we got to UCLA, how we got to Los Angeles, or how we got to the US.
Thank you, Cynthia. Victor, how would you answer? Why do you believe the book, The Best We Could Do, is an important text to read as UCLA's 2018 Common Book?
Great, thanks, Leanne. I think Cynthia did a great job of setting up why this is such an excellent choice, especially when she invoked the idea of empathy, that it is certainly a common book, and it's also pardon the maybe corny way of putting it, but an uncommon book, because it's also a very remarkable story. So being able to make that connection between the common and the uncommon is quite an impressive accomplishment of a book. And that I also think that it's very significant that it's a memoir, and that it uses a single person's story that makes it therefore relatable in that way to also tell a very unique and special family story as well. When I'm planning my courses, I like to think of a quotation that I love from the writer Richard Wright, where he says that every first-rate novel, poem, or play lifts the level of consciousness higher. And I think that Thi Bui's The Best We Could Do really fits that ideal so well. And it's been exciting to take part in the conversations that have been happening already around the book.
Thank you very much, Victor. And Stephen, can you please give us your perspective in terms of why do you believe the book is an important text to read as UCLA's 2018 Common Book?
So I think The Best We Could Do is such an important text, particularly for this year and this, I guess this time period, because something that's really pertinent is the current political climate. With communities of color and topics of immigration being such relevant conversations in society today, I feel that the best we could do as this year's Common Book really enriches the conversations about diversity and understanding what it means for people to be an immigrant, to come from immigrant families. And as Cynthia and Dr. Bhaskara referenced or brought up, it's about developing empathy as well as understanding between communities and across communities. And something relevant that I thought when I hear this question is the Syrian refugee crisis, right? This book talks about the Vietnamese refugee experience through the memoir of Thi Bui. And I think as a scholar and also as a citizen of the world, it's important to learn from our history. And Thi Bui does a really good job of conveying what it's like to be part of that and having that direct experience.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Well, we've got quite a few different questions that came in, and so why don't we start and kick it off with the first one. And Cynthia, I'd like to start with you, please. Can you please share how the Common Book program came to be and how the book is selected each year, and what are the goals for this program?
Sure. Well, the program actually started 9 years ago here at UCLA, and I believe it was originally taken up by the FIR, so faculty and residents in the residence halls. And over time, it really has evolved to include more campus partners. This year in particular was a shift in how we've done things. In the past, the book was distributed to incoming first years and transfer students during the summer orientation period. And through our data collection, we realized that not a lot of students were actually reading the book for various reasons. It's the end of the summer, they're enjoying their last few days of summer freedom. And, being an incoming student, you need time to transition. And there were many other things that were really overshadowing the potential for a great experience with a Common Book. And so what we decided to do this year was really change up how we distributed the book to students. So what will be happening starting again this current year is that there's a committee that we put together. It's composed of students, faculty, staff all over UCLA, and they read books that have been nominated by really anyone, and you can find this on our website. They choose the books over the summer, and then in the fall is when we start making arrangements, contacting the distributor, contacting our campus partners, and making sure that we develop strong relationships so that we can invoke them in connecting with our campus partners and really do the best that we can to provide a rich, year-long series of programs. And so that's been really successful this year, and I think it really fulfills the goal of the program, which is really two-pronged. The first is that we want to ignite campus discussion around really important issues, current issues that are going on, not just locally, but globally. And second, inspiring action, whether that is having a meeting with your peers, doing a workshop by a department or a center here on campus. We really want to inspire, provide that jumping off point for students, faculty, staff to feel inspired to do something about the issues that they care about.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that background. I see that there's a comment that came in from Edward B., and he mentions our student has not had any exposure to this year's Common Book in any of the courses, of her courses. Is the Common Book accessed mainly through courses or on an individual basis?
Well, luckily, we have access through both. We were able to execute a campus-wide distribution this year. So we partnered with various offices in departments, the Department of Asian American Studies, which we had just a fantastic turnout for. They were able to hand out books to any student that walked into their office. We partnered with the Powell Library, the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life, all over campus. And so that was one way that any student could pick up the book. Of course, we still target incoming first years and transfers, but we do not turn anyone away. So if there's an upperclassman or second year student who wants to have the book, they certainly can receive it that way. We were also really fortunate to form strong relationships with faculty all across UCLA. And so the book was included in the syllabi for courses in English department, World Arts and Cultures, Asian American Studies, and one of the GE cluster courses. And so if students have not yet had a chance to pick up the book, there are still opportunities. They can contact our office or they can follow our website and see the upcoming locations. I know that we have a couple of distributions still left, and in the upcoming winter and spring programs, which include a really great event hosted by VSU, the Vietnamese Student Union, Black April Commemoration, there will be plenty of opportunities to pick up the book.
Thank you, Cynthia. And for the parents on the call, if you are looking for the book, I know I went to my local public library and it was available there, so you may want to check it out. I encourage reading it. It's really a very educational, and it's a great book to read. And it's a graphic novel, so there's lots of pictures in there, and it's a good book. Thank you, Cynthia. And so I have a question for you, Cynthia. For our viewers who have not yet had a chance to read the book, can you just give a brief overview of the book, please?
Sure, and Victor and Stephen can certainly add to anything that I miss, but this is a really wonderful illustrated memoir from Thi Bui, and it focuses on her and her family's journey in two ways. The first, her experience of understanding her family's history when they had to leave Vietnam in the 70s. And the second part to it is really understanding her own journey in making sense of that history as she is forming her own life and her own set of experiences here in the US. And so it's a really, I think, important text and beautiful text to read that many people can find a connection to.
Thank you. All right, well, Stephen, I've got a question for you. How is the Vietnamese Student Association engaging around the novel, the book, The Best We Could Do? And how would you like to see your fellow students do so?
Yeah, so in VSU, the Vietnamese Student Union, I've been in contact with Cynthia since the beginning of fall quarter, and I've been so excited to work with her to see how the Vietnamese Student Union could play a part in spreading awareness about, this is our story, this is our narrative, because it's so exciting to have a book that hits so close to home for us. And so a few things that we've been doing was that we just had our Vietnamese culture night week 2, so that's about a month ago. And what we did is we gave out common books as a kind of promotional event, because that's when the common book was beginning to really kickstart. And so I think that really played a part in VCN, because culture is something that is part of our identity, and part of our identity is also reliant on our history. And the common book was also like a supplemental piece to our culture night, as much as the culture night helped bring exposure to the common book program. And so we continued working through social media and to help publicize, these common book pop-ups, events that are going on, such as when the author herself came onto campus just a couple weeks ago. And it was great for me, for other students. I saw so many familiar faces make it out to that book signing. And it was definitely something that was really touching to me. And I'm still, in VSU, we're still having a couple more events to really expand on the themes of the book. Specifically in a couple weeks, week 8, we're going to have a general meeting that talks about our immigrant experience or anyone's personal immigrant experience. Talking about it in relation to the common book and how we use the power of storytelling to really convey our narrative and share our stories with people who aren't really familiar with them. And so I'm really excited to be hosting that meeting in a couple weeks. And lastly, one of our biggest events every year is Black April Commemoration. And so I know Cynthia brought this up. I'm going to be producing and chairing this event, and it's a great honor to do so, because Black April Commemoration, for those who don't know, is a program that honors the fall of Saigon, which heralded the end of the Vietnam War and led to the mass exodus of Vietnamese refugees in 1975. And so as part of our history as a people, we use this program to really reconcile the generation gap that has occurred between the current generation, my generation, and our parents, because there are experiences that are often really hard to talk about. And Thi Bui makes this really apparent, because the Vietnam War was a very traumatic experience for many families. And one of the most poignant parts of the story that I remember is when Thi Bui was saying, stories came not in a linear fashion. They came as fragments, as bits and pieces. And so even for me as a student and VSU as an organization, that's still something that we're trying to piece together ourselves too. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. It sounds like you've got some exciting things coming up in the weeks to come. and how exciting that the author was able to come right on campus at UCLA. Thank you for sharing that. So on to the next question. Victor, I have one for you, please. How has the Asian American Studies Department been involved in this year's Common Book efforts?
Great, thanks for the question, Leanne. And I think this also builds on what both Stephen and Cynthia were talking about with the various arenas and platforms and contexts in which this book can be experienced. And that it has been ever since the summer when we had learned that this was the book chosen. We were so excited, and we were ready to snap into action, because really this is why the Department of Asian American Studies at UCLA is here. It's our privilege and it's our purpose to facilitate access to this kind of material. It's kind of like a dream come true that they're going to give away this amazing book and we'll get to talk about it with the whole campus. It really fits a model of what's sometimes referred to as an engaged scholarship, and that there's a phrase from the early movement days that would lead to things like Asian American Studies and Chicano Studies and African American Studies and American Indian Studies and gender studies and all these great important transformative fields, and that serve the people. And that the way that we have been playing a part in that model of how to serve the people is, as an academic department, we can provide especially expertise, but also with a community-oriented focus to promote community involvement through student organizations, through the many different offices here on campus, and that we can turn to our brilliant colleagues and alumni, such as Professor Tu Hong Win Vo, who participated in one of the panels, or a couple of our alumni, Jolie Chia, who was also on a panel, who has a doctorate in American Studies as well, and TK Lei, who did an excellent interview on the opening night with the author. And TK is one of our alumni and also is an organizer and an artist. And that we view our role as an academic department to be that kind of bridge, to make those kind of connections between communities that aren't always so visible in the curriculum and on the campus and in other capacities, and to be that space and to be that method by which those connections, those bridges can be made. That to us is what a department is centrally committed to doing.
Thank you, Victor. And how fortunate for UCLA to have access to the individuals that you mentioned. They offer such rich information and backgrounds and just different cultural aspects that they share. So thank you very much. I have another question, Stephen, for you. What is it about the best we could do that resonates powerfully with the UCLA student experience?
So I'm going to touch a little bit on my true Bruin pride. One of our core values is respect, right? And to really respect others and other communities, our parents, our peers, it's important to understand their stories. And the best we could do really highlights the Vietnamese community's story and history. And I think as I kind of mentioned earlier, it adds diversity and compassion because we are, as students here, we are also part of the UCLA community, and we are constantly in an environment of where we're trying to discover our own self-identities. And part of knowing that is being in touch with ourselves and our histories, our families, and communities that we're a part of. And so a quote that a lot of people throw around is "no history, no self." And so no could be N-O or no as in K-N-O-W. Without your history, you don't really have a true understanding of yourself. But if you do, you're able to really develop your self-identity. And as students here, we're constantly trying to develop as people, as scholars, as professionals. And the best we could do, really, in terms of how Thi Bui told the story of how she was also trying to go down that path of self-discovery and self-identity, I think students here can also relate to it. And I think the book has a sort of underlying call to action where it's about creating those conversations, whether it be with others we might not get along with, we may have differences with, or that there are barriers to communication for. And so it could be anyone, and our parents, our peers. And I really think that it's about building that cross-community interaction and cultural understanding.
Thank you, Stephen. That's great. And, you know, with the students and perhaps just different class projects, you're in a study group or roommate situations, just having that cross-communication skill set is always important. So it's nice to just broaden your backgrounds in that perspective. All right, well, let's see, Victor, I have a question for you, please. The book's strong theme of immigration is obviously very culturally relevant at this time. Why was it important to bring this conversation to the forefront of this year's Common Book efforts?
Great, thanks, Leanne. And that is a provocative question. I would say, especially in our current political climate, that historically immigration has kind of always been a polarizing idea in American culture, but not always evenly polarizing. And we seem to be at a moment where that polarizing aspect of immigration is especially heightened. And immigration then, because of that meaning, or the various meanings that get projected onto it, can be something that arouses great interest and difficult questions that people want answers to, and sometimes those answers aren't always so easy. Things that seem to be fairly straightforward questions start to reveal complicated histories. Questions like, how did we get here, and what does it mean, and how is the story of one immigrant family unique, or in many ways so relatable to others. And that even the very idea, the very concept of immigration starts to become potentially more complicated and historically enriching, given the refugee experiences that The Best We Could Do makes literally visible for us in the illustrations, as well as putting it into words. I think that one of the ways that the book functions so well as a representation of immigration is because it is a memoir, and that it calls up the ways that immigration is an experience that reaches into the future, that crosses generations, and has lessons to impart in both directions, certainly from parents to children, but also how the second generation, with their adjustments, with the lives that they make, give new meaning to the migratory experiences of the parents. And that I feel is very powerfully rendered in The Best We Could Do.
Thank you, Victor. Well put. I just wanted to remind everybody on the panel, feel free if you'd like to interject or have any additional comments, feel free. This is a very fluid conversation. Cynthia,
yeah,
I do. Go ahead.
Can I add on to that?
Of course, please.
Yeah. So, you know, immigration being such a strong or very prevalent political issue today, I think it's really important to not just see it as a political issue. It's also an issue that we have to humanize. because these experiences, as Professor Bhaskar was saying, are very personal, and Thi Bui literally puts images to it, you know. And for me, being Vietnamese myself, being a child of Vietnamese refugees, seeing that story come to life artistically was very moving. And it makes me think about all of like the current political debates around it. But I think it's also important to understand that these immigrant experiences are part of who people are, and it's not necessarily a political issue, right? It's an issue of human rights as well.
Thank you, Stephen. Cynthia, I'd like to rotate to you now. I have a question. How can the UCLA community support international immigrant and refugee students in celebrating their cultural identity as they adapt to American norms and customs?
You know, I really appreciate this question. As a higher education scholar and practitioner, I think it is the duty of higher education institutions to make sure that students and the rest of the community, staff, faculty, feel welcomed and they feel special and they feel valued in the community. And so I'll start my answer with that, there being a sense of duty from the institution's perspective. And I think, you know, one of the main ways that we can celebrate students is by highlighting not only their struggles and barriers that they may face, but their hopes and dreams and journeys. Certainly in my case, I am a first-generation college student. My parents were born and raised in Mexico and came to the US right before I was born. And I know for them, me going to college was really important. It was a life's mission, really. And it's an experience that they never got to experience themselves. And so I think when an institution makes its best effort to welcome and work in developing a sense of belonging for students who are immigrants or children of immigrants, I think it extends not just to the student, but to the family. And I know that some of the efforts that UCLA has made when I was an undergraduate here really were appreciated by my family, by my parents, who only want us, their children. They want us to succeed. They want us to feel comfortable. They want us to achieve dreams that they couldn't in the past. And so I think it's really special when institutions really put forth the effort to make students feel welcome, and immigrant refugee students particularly. And then to just further elaborate, I think one special thing to note is that when institutions think about welcoming and creating a comfortable environment for immigrants and refugees on their campus, this is really an effort that needs to be undertaken by the entire campus community, not just the particular department that is in alignment with the background of the group. I think this is an effort that needs to be championed by everyone, and that's something that we try to do this year, and not just putting the onus on the Department of Asian American Studies or VSU. We really try to incorporate as many departments and offices that we could, because I think it's really our collective effort that brings true sense of belonging here on campus for these communities.
Thank you, Cynthia. Victor or Stephen, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to add that it's important to also recognize that not all immigrants' experiences are the same. There are many people that come from whose families come from many different countries and places, it's important to recognize that there are like subgroups of immigrants. We have the undocumented community. We have the documented community. We have refugees. We have international students. And so it's important that the UCLA community doesn't really label immigrants because it's such, like the topic of immigration is something that we like to condense into this one word, but it's important to recognize that the experiences and stories is very diverse. And so as Cynthia was saying, it's important that we don't just have the people who are making decisions, people in specific departments playing a part in really building that interaction and solidarity and unity at UCLA, but also having people who aren't familiar with what it means to be a specific type of immigrant or a first-generation student.
Thank you very much.
And
Victor?
yes, I just wanted to add to the comments that folks are saying about what it means for there to be a Common Book program at all, and for the best we could do to be this year's Common Book. When I was training in my doctoral studies, I was at a university that prided itself on having a great books program, but you can sort of guess what those great books tended to be, the traditional capital G, capital B, great books. And the students would talk about how they felt a sense of community because they knew that whatever setting they were in with their fellow classmates, they could refer to those great books and instantly be able to feel a sense of connection and commonality. And for that kind of experience to be produced at UCLA through things like Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, or Thi Bui's The Best We Could Do, or all of the other common books, is a kind of amazing moment of reclaiming education for new populations, and it's very inspiring that there are these programs, and we look forward to future common books that will make it possible for those books to serve that transformative function.
Thank you very much, Victor, for your perspective on that. So, Stephen, we've got a few more questions to get to. Stephen, what do you hope the UCLA community will learn from exploring this text and these issues together?
Thanks for the question, Leanne. What do I hope for the UCLA community to learn? I think it's open-mindedness and consideration of different ways of conveying one narrative. In history, growing up, we are given these textbooks that are really written from the perspectives of American history, right? For the Vietnam War, you just learned the facts on what happened, but until you read like books and stories that tell it from a more personal perspective, I think it really opens your eyes and to understanding and taking it personally, history personally, and not something that quote unquote objectively happens, because objectivity, we can argue about this. I don't think objectivity exists. But I think that this text does a really good job in conveying a story through a specific type of lens. One of the things I'm learning in my World Arts and Culture class right now is the fact that there are different ontologies and epistemologies, which essentially means that there are different ways of creating knowledge, of creating a sense of being. And I think as we depart from this way that we're fed information, that we're fed to think by textbooks, until we start engaging in people's stories and not facts, that I believe that the UCLA community can really become more diverse and also more compassionate and be able to act on that compassion.
That's great. Thank you, Stephen. So, Victor, I have a question. Society has many perceptions about refugees. What does Bui address, and how do these perceptions shape her experience?
Yeah, thanks, Leanne, for that question. The figure of the refugee is of such clear importance to the best we could do. It is a story of a refugee family, but what is so important to remember about that story is that it's a story of a refugee family told by a refugee family from their perspective, so that not only do you get the stories of the conditions that led to the refugee flight in the first place, but also the ways that they built their lives after that, including the relationships that we see and the memories that get recalled and that are dramatized in the telling of this family story. It's not. I think it was Stephen was rightly mentioning that it's a story that doesn't necessarily follow a smooth linear pattern, but goes back and forth in time in the way that memory can be experienced and called up and forgotten and repressed and unrepressed, especially when the experiences are so traumatic and devastating as we see here. So that again, it's crucial that that refugee story is told, but not necessarily just from the headlines, not just necessarily from the way that the self-appointed savior of the refugee, we might say, would want to see the refugee story, but in the kind of complex family and individual level experiences that these refugees have lived out, the communities that they've made, the further movements that they've gone on to do, the dreams that they've achieved, and the challenges that remain. These all start to complicate that potentially all too easy conception of the refugee as the helpless victim, or possibly the figure of fear that sometimes emerges around the refugee as well.
Thank you very much, Victor.
Can I add a little bit on more to Professor Vescar's answer? Refugees are far from needing to be saved or helpless. I think if anything, the best we could do really conveys the resilience and fortitude of refugees and their families. Right? We came to the United States or whichever country they fled to. We came with literally nothing. Our families did, and I think it's important to be aware of that perseverance. In addition, I'd also like to add that we see these wars, these conflicts as history, as something that happened in the past, but for many of the people who have direct experiences with within their families, it's part of their current story. How can society understand what we went through if I, as a child of refugees, still don't fully understand it myself? Because I can read it from a textbook and say, yeah, I understand it, but that's my story, but how come I don't feel a connection to it? And so I think it's important that we do have different ways of having stories be told. As Thi Bui, she does that through her parents. And so in terms of the question of society having different perceptions, it's also crucial and imperative, as Professor Vescar pointed out, that these experiences are told from different perspectives, such as Thi Bui's.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for that. Well, here's a last question before the final question. And Stephen, this one's for you, please. In the novel, Bui explores her role in relationships as a mother, wife, sister, daughter, and granddaughter. What intergenerational challenges do UCLA students, particularly those whose families have immigrated to the US, face today, and how do these challenges influence their experience?
So intergenerational challenges, there are many. To name a few, there is trauma, mental health issues as a result of just the immigrant experience. It's not easy to pick up everything and move. There are stigmas that popular society has of immigrants, and as social beings, that is definitely a social factor that stifles the growth of many immigrant students. And furthermore, I think, at least I can speak on behalf of the Vietnamese culture, is that we are we focus on family instead of the individual. We always say that we will take care of our parents when we grow up, whereas American culture is like spread your wings and fly, right? And so it's a disparity that causes a specific dissonance where, yeah, I want to pursue my own dreams. I want to study philosophy, for example. But when you have your parents who have literally fought to survive, and when they know what it's like to live day to day, from paycheck to paycheck, that type of, I guess, individual goal to do what you want seems too self-indulgent. And so that's something that many children of immigrants or immigrant youth at UCLA do face. And it's important that we are able to come together as a community to talk about it, to support each other, and really create a conversation with our parents and families, because there is that is a very real generation gap for many immigrant students at UCLA. Moreover, because immigrant communities tend to be on the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder, I'd like to say, there is a lack of resources, a lack of support systems, of role models, of peer networks to really encourage a culture of investing in yourself, investing in your own human capital, right? And I think that's why it's hard for students to even get to higher education in the first place. And I think that being here at UCLA is a privilege that many people need to understand that isn't a real option for other communities. And so I think to tie it all together, the notion of living for yourself and versus satisfying the expectations of your loved ones, as someone who comes, or as a child of refugees and a first-generation student, is something that, you know, I think I'll always be trying to reconcile. But for UCLA students, I think it's important that we continue having these conversations, because only through having such conversations do we get to move forward and really try to find those answers little bit by little bit.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Cynthia, would you like to answer that from your point of view? What intergenerational challenges do UCLA students, particularly those whose families have immigrated to the US, face today? And how do these challenges influence their experience?
Yes, definitely. I think everything that Stephen mentioned was spot on. And so I'll add with the idea of communication. I think for current students, so you have two different parties that you're really talking about. You're talking about the student, the children in this scenario, and the parents, or extended family members, grandparents, aunties, uncles, and you have two sides that are yearning to learn about one another. And given that they are in a different geographical location that can breed and encourage different ideas of lifestyle, goals, you can have quite a bit of misunderstanding. In addition to that, you have histories that are not necessarily taught in schools. As it was mentioned earlier by both Stephen and Victor, these conversations are so important to have, particularly because these are not stories that you find in the K through 12 school books. These are not stories that you tend to find in the capital G, capital B, great books that we are often so familiar with. And so, again, you have two different generations trying to understand one another, trying to deal with the current environment politically, socially. And then you have on one side, the student child side, a limited understanding of what their parents went through. And from the parents' side, a limited understanding of what their child is going through here. And so I see communication or miscommunication being a really a tough challenge for not just students, but for their parents and their families as well. And I think when students come to UCLA or any college or higher education institution, they have the opportunity, hopefully, they have the opportunity to learn about these histories, to have conversations about their histories and how to approach this with their families. One of the most amazing things that I saw in the panel and in the book signing when Thi Bui was here on campus was that so many students asked her for tips on how to start conversations with their parents and start figuring out and piecing together their history and really building that bridge. And to me, that was one of the most rewarding moments as the lead in the Common Book program, where I just felt like we were doing our part in bridging these generations. And so that was just so beautiful. It's a memory that I'm going to have for a very long time. And I think, to highlight Victor's work and the work of the department, the existence of these departments is so important, again, because they provide a space, courses, faculty, people who have access and historical knowledge on what has happened. And so they also serve as a bridge to their histories. I know, like I mentioned, I knew very little about the experience of Mexican Americans and Chicanos here in the US. It was not taught in my schools when I was growing up, and it wasn't until I came and was majored in Chicano studies that I learned about it. And so for me, I think that's also one very special thing about being on a college campus, that if done correctly, if people's energies and knowledge are just put together in the right way, it can really be fruitful, not just for the students and the staff, faculty here, but also the families in which it ripples to. So thank you for that question.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Well, this panel is just so interesting, and just the background and the knowledge that you share. I feel like I want to go back to college and go to UCLA if I could get in. Well, I have one final question, and we'll start it off with Victor, and you'll all have the same question. If there is one key piece of information you feel a parent or family member should take away from this discussion, what would it be? Victor?
Yeah, I think this very much builds on what Cynthia was saying. There was a comment that Thi Bui made when she was here about the process of the making of the book, where she said it started out as an oral history. Basically, she just wanted to transcribe and get the stories of her parents, which is a great objective. But she said it then became a memoir. That as she spoke with them and got their oral histories, she herself became then a part of it and a character in that remembering, and then it results in this impressively crafted, illustrated memoir that now future generations will be able to use potentially as a kind of a method for how to bring about that kind of change.
Thank you, Victor. Stephen, how about you, please?
Yeah, I think one takeaway that I think a parent or family member should have is to be willing to make those conversations, to be willing to talk about some things that are uncomfortable. Because a lot of times it's better than keeping them in the closet or keeping them in the back of your head, because over time, this tension, or if there's tension about a certain topic that isn't really discussed, that builds up and it can have a really, it could be detrimental towards both the relationship between parent and kid, but also both individuals' experiences moving forward. So yeah, just making those conversations and being willing to talk and open up.
Thank you, Stephen. And Cynthia?
Again, everybody said just things that I would have said as well. So I'll just add this. I think there is deep value in learning about other people, learning about perspectives that are not your own, learning about histories that may not be exactly what yours were. And one of the beautiful things about the Common Book program, and in particular this book, was that it is an opportunity for us to dialogue and to learn about these experiences in a familiar place. And I think that's just, everyone should read the book. Everyone should nominate books for next year, because this is a really wonderful opportunity for really community learning.
Well, thank you so much, Cynthia, Victor, and Stephen. Thank you for sharing about the Common Book with us. Your perspectives are just so valuable, and we hope that the audience enjoyed this exclusive opportunity to ask their questions. You know, just learning about how the Common Book is selected and all of your different perspectives in terms of this particular book, and learning about the culture and just the boat people coming over from Vietnam. It just was very educational. And as I had mentioned in the beginning, if you haven't had an opportunity to read the book, please try and get it at your library or borrow it from your child. You won't be disappointed. I want to thank everyone who was able to join us tonight and submitted the questions. And if you submitted a question that wasn't answered, Parent and Family Programs team will definitely follow up with the response in the next few days. The recorded version of this webinar will be available shortly, and your feedback is so important. So if you have any recommendations or feedback, we want to hear about it. Any suggestions for future calls? And finally, please do not forget about our next scheduled webinar, which is Wednesday, March 21st at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And this will be a topic about understanding your students' summer opportunities. So we look forward to seeing you all then. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you.